Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's regular program, which is we're covering The Discernment of Spirits by St. Ignatius of Loyola. If you don't have this book, it's available on Amazon and eBay and other places. We're covering the version by Dr. Timothy Gallager, Father Timothy Gallager, OMV. This is a really good study. Discernment of Spirits is something that is so incredibly powerful for lay people, religious. Everyone can get something out of this. And I'm hoping that if you return, you've got your journal ready, you're ready to look at the next chapter, which is this is one of the hardest ones. And we're going to cover a lot of instances because this Discernment of Spirits chapter, this is the trial. This is the spiritual desolation. This is the black night of the soul that is going to really stump most of us on our spiritual walk. So don't go anywhere. Hello, my name is Farah Rose Perry, Sister Farah Rose Perry. And for some of you that do not know me, I am a Professed Franciscan, and I am not a discalced. I am not a habit-wearing sister. I am a sister, and my profession is recorded at the Vatican. I live in the community of the world, the secular community, not the community of professed religious. So I don't wear any sort of special garb other than my tau to denote who I am. And so a lot of people comment from time to time, you don't look like a sister and I can't listen to you because you don't sound like a sister. Well, this is an opportunity for us to learn about what the third order is, and you can find out all about it at on the Franciscans website. I'll see if I can't find that link and drop it for those of you that are curious. And I just had my 59th birthday, so I had a little break there, an extra week, with the 4th of July festivities. So thank you for bearing with me and being patient. And I haven't been able to go live yet. I will be in chat, but not live yet. So I'm looking forward to going back live with all of you. As usual, when we begin these shows, this weekly show, this Discernment of Spirits is a tough one. It was tough for me because I've gone through this a few times. And in this spiritual desolation, in the times of trial, God knows we're going to slip and slide and fall back and just get so sad, and it's tough. So as you listen, as I read from some of these excerpts, just take a breather. Don't be so hard on yourself. If you are absolutely new, please go back to the first one, unless you just want to go ahead and listen to this one and see if maybe it draws you. And if you like it, if you get a little bit out of it, if you'd share it, give us a like, a thumbs up, or even a comment. Even a comment, any kind of comment, positive, negative. I love to hear your feedback. We're going to get right into praying, and then I'm going to get reading the excerpts from Discernment of Spirits by St. Ignatius of Loyola and outlined by Father Timothy Gallager. And then we're going to get into our journaling and some other examples of how you and I can approach this rule, number 4, spiritual desolation. Here we go. In nomine Patris et Filio et Spiritus Sanctus, sic erat in principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Amen. Sancta Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio, contra nequitiam in insidiis diaboli esto presidium. Imperire Deus supplicis deprecamur tuque. Princeps militia celestis satanum aliosque spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum pervegantur in mundo divina virtute in infernum detrude. Amen. Our study prayer. Suscipe. Suscipe Domini universum meum libertatem, accipe memoriam, intellectum atque voluntatem omnem, quid guidavio ver possideo, mihi largitus est, et tibi totum restit suo ac tui prorsus voluntate tradu gubernandum. Amorem tui solum cum gratia tui mihi dones, et tibi sum satis ec aluit quidquam ultroposco, Amen. The Discernment of Spirits, an Ignation guide for everyday living. Spiritual Desolation, rule number 4. The time of trial. In his 4th rule, Ignatius discusses spiritual desolation, the counterpart of the spiritual consolation he described in the previous rule. Consideration of spiritual consolation, given the uplifting nature of this interior movement, is welcome and heartening. Reflection on spiritual desolation, however, is more daunting, at least initially. Yet in all discernment of spirits, few considerations are more valuable and more ultimately encouraging than those Ignatius offers on spiritual desolation. The clear understanding of such spiritual desolation to which he guides us in the 4th rule begins already to diminish its power to dishearten us. In every spiritual journey, according to the varying circumstances of each person, experiences of trial may and do occur. If it is not understood and resisted, the potential of such discouragement to cause spiritual harm in persons seeking God is clear. Ignatius terms such experiences spiritual desolation and dedicates his 4th rule to instructing us regarding them. All who seek to grow spiritually will readily grasp the great need to be aware of, to understand, and appropriately respond to such discouraging spiritual movements. In his 4th rule, Ignatius continues to describe the different movements which are caused in the soul. The movements of the heart that compromise the matter we discern in discernment of spirits. In the preceding rule, he explored the first of these movements, spiritual consolation. Now he centers on the second, directly contrary to the first, that is, spiritual desolation. The 4th rule reads, the 4th is of spiritual desolation. I call desolation all the contrary of the 3rd rule, such as darkness of soul, disturbance in it, movement to low and earthly things, disquiet from various agitations and temptations, moving to lack of confidence, without hope, without love, finding oneself totally slothful, tepid, sad, and as if separated from one's own Creator and Lord. For just as consolation is contrary to desolation, in the same way the thoughts that come from consolation are contrary to the thoughts that come from desolation. Here, once more, the principle of contrariety is powerfully present, quote unquote. I call desolation all the contrary of the 3rd rule, unquote. Spiritual desolation will be precisely the opposite of all we have seen in the last chapter regarding spiritual consolation. The principle indicates that we could largely write the 4th rule simply by taking the 3rd rule and stating its contrary. If the spiritual consolation consists in quiet of heart, spiritual desolation will consist in disquiet of heart. If spiritual consolation is joyful, spiritual desolation will be sad. And so the opposition could be continued. Comparison of the two roles, as Ignatius composed them, confirms this parallelism in contrasting qualities. As with consolation, so with desolation, Ignatius distinguishes what is spiritual and what is non-spiritual. Ignatius employs the term desolation according to the familiar usage of the word, a condition of affective heaviness that instills sadness and depletes energy for living. The adjective spiritual, as throughout these rules, signifies that which is directly and immediately referred to faith and the pursuit of God's will. Thus, the phrase spiritual desolation indicates an affective heaviness, directly impacting our faith and pursuit of God's will. We experience movements of consolation both on the non-spiritual and the spiritual levels. So desolation may be experienced on either level as well. If we overextend ourselves and do not provide for sufficient nourishment, exercise, rest, our physical energies will diminish. To the extent that the process continues, we feel an increasing heaviness in facing life. We will experience physically based, non-spiritual desolation. The same is true of our emotional energies. If we are disheartened, and to some degree sad, depressed, while this depressed condition endures, psychological heaviness will color all we encounter in life. We will experience psychologically based, non-spiritual desolation. Neither level of desolation mentioned here has immediate and direct reference to faith. And in this sense, neither is spiritual. Obviously, non-spiritual does not mean of no significance. As was true of non-spiritual consolation, so also non-spiritual desolation is frequently a springboard for spiritual desolation. A man pushes himself to the maximum for the number of months without proper rest or exercise, and he grows increasingly weary. He'll find relationships at work and at home become heavier to sustain non-spiritual desolation here. And a time will soon come when prayer, too, has become heavier and God seems farther away than before. Spiritual desolation here. Non-spiritual desolation, viewed from the perspective of a spiritual life, is more than a humanly heavy movement in need of healing. It also constitutes a fertile source of spiritual desolation, and so a potential hazard for the spiritual journey. The less we do to overcome physical tiredness or psychological tiredness in non-spiritual desolation, the more likely we are to experience spiritual desolation as well. If we are tired or we're depressed, the step to discouragement in our God-given calling, to diminishing fidelity in prayer or in God's service generally, is very small. From the perspective of spiritual life, and specifically in regard to avoiding spiritual desolation, it is imperative that we be wise stewards of all dimensions of the humanity that God has graced us with. If the good spirit gives inspirations in rule number 2, that communicate light and clarify the way towards God, the enemy, conversely, instills a darkness of soul with precisely the contrary effect. Here, the person feels helplessly trapped in confusion, unable to comprehend what is occurring spiritually. Mingled with this inability to understand It is effectively heavy sense that things are going badly and will continue to worsen. This darkness instilling action of the enemy is operative in fear. It is an illusion and aids in confusion together with disquietude to discouragement. When we find ourselves caught in an anxiety-filled darkness in relation to our life of faith, then we are experiencing this first form of spiritual desolation. Quote unquote, disturbance. We have seen Ignatius write that the enemy will try to upset you, to interfere with your peace of mind. Unquote. This disturbance of the heart illustrates the troubling, unsettling, restless quality that characterizes spiritual desolation. When we have lost our former peace in seeking the Lord, and our hearts are upset and disturbed, then we are in spiritual desolation. Quote, movement to low and earthly things, unquote. In the joy of spiritual consolation, there's an upward call and attraction to heavenly things. In the heaviness of spiritual desolation, there will be exactly the contrary movement, and here there will be a downward attraction toward low and earthly things. Persons in spiritual consolation are drawn to God and the things of God, prayer, the scriptures, worship, service of others, in response to God's call, sharing in the life of the church and similar God-centered matters. Persons in spiritual desolation, on the contrary, feel no attraction to prayer, to God's service, but are drawn toward lower and more earthly things. Material comforts, gratification of the body in various ways, memories of such things from the past, immersion in empty trivia, diversion through the media, the internet, busyness, superficial conversation, and similar occupations. Certainly, many earthly things serve to provide a healthy relaxation that strengthen us humanly, so in our service to the Lord, this is not what Ignatius intends here in speaking of movements to low and earthly things. He's speaking rather of the downward pull arising from the heaviness of spiritual desolation towards low things that weaken our progress toward God. Quote, disquiet from various agitations and temptations. Once again, we encounter the characteristic disquieting quality of the enemy's action, already mentioned in Rule 2. Here, Ignatius pinpoints a further trait of spiritual desolation. Within the heaviness of the desolation, the person experiences a restless flow of agitating movements, mixed with temptations and disquiet in the person. This churning stream of agitating stirrings and temptations is accompanied by a sense of disquiet, and the presence will trouble the person's peace. The person who is experiencing such agitation and temptations and disquiet of heart is undergoing spiritual desolation. Quote, moving to lack of confidence without hope, without love. Here, too, spiritual desolation shows itself the exact contrary of spiritual consolation. In spiritual consolation, the person experiences an increase of hope, faith, and charity. In spiritual desolation, there's a contrary movement toward the lack of confidence, hope, and love. This lack experienced in spiritual desolation does not signify the loss of faith, hope, and love as abiding virtues in the heart of the baptized. What decreases is the conscious felt experience of these three virtues. Persons in spiritual desolation may find themselves without hope. It is crucial that persons seeking God be aware of, understand, and reject the debilitating insinuations of such spiritual desolation. Persons in spiritual desolation finally feel that they are without love. In spiritual consolation, the heart experiences a warm perception of God's love. In spiritual desolation, on the contrary, the heart finds itself cold, unable to sense God's loving presence. It feels as though it is without love. The feeling does not signify that such dedicated persons, in fact, have no love of God. Rather, it's a classic indication of spiritual desolation. Within the time of desolation, however, the perception can seem very real. To name such experiences as spiritual desolation is an invaluable step towards liberation from the lie they suggest. Quote, finding oneself totally slothful, tepid, and sad. Ignatius implies here it is three further forms of spiritual desolation. Persons in such desolation may experience themselves as entirely slothful, tepid, and sad, as in feeling that they are. These three attitudes seem to dominate and appear to these persons to describe totally their state of heart. Persons seeking God may recognize these or similar experiences in their own spiritual journey. It's important to observe that none of these three attitudes, slothfulness, tepidity, and sadness, is any indication that the love of God has diminished from them. It does not signify that the person has ceased to be a person of faith. All three, rather, experiences are of the trial of spiritual desolation. Quote, end as if separated from one's Creator and Lord. End quote. Ignatius advisedly qualifies this feeling of separation with the words, as if. Though they feel separated from God, persons in spiritual desolation are not in fact separated from God, who is ever Emmanuel, God with us. Ignatius is highlighting a fundamental characteristic of spiritual desolation. While it endures, any felt consciousness of God's loving presence is weakened or absent, and such persons feel as if they are separated from God. Ignatius's words, as if, prompt a crucial observation about spiritual desolation in general. Such desolation insinuates an identity between the heavy feelings of desolation and a person's real spiritual condition. Thus, in spiritual desolation, thoughts such as these will arise. You are now feeling a movement toward low and earthly things, toward various forms of self-indulgence. This is the kind of person you really are, too weak to overcome what holds you back from God. You are troubled by various agitations and temptation this day. This is who you are, a person without spiritual peace, unable to rise above temptation. You feel you have no hope in your prayer that it will be fruitful today, and you feel little desire to pray. This is who you are spiritually, a person who does not love prayer. You feel sad, as if separated from God. This, too, is who you are. In fact, a person far from God. This lie, for it is a lie, of spiritual desolation includes a false equation between what the person feels in desolation and what the person is spiritually. If we accept this lie, discouragement, and decline in progress toward God are not far away. If, however, we do understand that such feelings indicate rather the trial of spiritual desolation, that God's call is to be faithful and thus grow spiritually through this trial, then an energizing liberation takes place in our hearts. The bonds of the lie are broken, and we are set free to follow the Lord with great courage. Remarkably, Ignatius utilizes the word lesson identically for both spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation. What is only implicitly affirmed from Rule 4 will become explicit in Rule 5. The thoughts alone that arise from spiritual consolation are to be accepted. Those feelings that come from spiritual desolation are to be rejected. Ignatius will provide us with effective tools to this end as his rules continue. In Rule 4, Ignatius presents a set of difficult movements that he calls spiritual desolation. These are in themselves heavy and unhappy experiences, yet in outlining them for us, such clarity begins to arrive as Ignatius has done us a service of enormous value. And as noted, it is when we are unaware of and do not understand the nature of spiritual desolation that we are most susceptible to its harmful deception. Once we comprehend clearly in practical and usable terms the nature of any spiritual desolation, we're on the road toward freedom from its tyranny. This is the service Ignatius renders us with his fourth rule. Ignatian discernment of spirits opens the gateway to hope. It is a proclamation of liberation to those who were held in bondage. Luke 4:18. This is a lot, is it not? Woo! Oh my gosh. Now, for those of you that are new, welcome to, we are going through chapter by chapter, Discernment of Spirits, Father Timothy Gallager, OMV. You can find your copy on Amazon or at eBay. There's lots of different places. You can even probably get them in a bookstore if they have a great religious section. This is the most wonderful thing for self-exorcism, for doing your own spiritual work. If you're studying demonology, to aid, assist, or help in any deliverance team, do any deliverance work. This is excellent for your family. If you are the head of a family, if you're a parent, if you're a grandparent, if you're doing your best to pray your relatives, your family back into a level of faith, this is indispensable. There will not be a time in anyone's life that you will not come to a crossroad of thinking, what am I praying for? Why am I praying? Why do I pray every day? What am I doing these prayers every single day for? I'm not seeing anything. I don't feel like praying. I don't want to pray. I don't feel like it. I volunteer at the church every day. I do this every weekend. I do that at school. I do this. I do so much for God. I just don't feel like it. I'm not very good. I'm not getting ahead. These are the lies of what Ignatius calls the bad spirits. This is the opposite of the spiritual consolation that we covered last week. I'm hoping you're liking these videos. Give us a thumbs up and a like if you can, and share the video. Subscribe, click the bell. There's a bell down there somewhere. I'm Sister Farah Rose, and I am a Professed Franciscan, Third Order. Please look it up. I love what I do, and I myself have gone through great periods of spiritual desolation. And I will tell you from my last 12, not 12, maybe 17 years of discussing this sort of feelings and prayer with priests, deliverance ministers, exorcists, that there is something really important here that we need to pay attention to. Spiritual consolations can easily lift us up, and they may be private experiences, and we feel that we are being given prophetic messages, we're being given, we have all these wonderful feelings. And when I say feelings aren't bad. However, in discernment of spirits, we need to be very careful, especially in this chapter in Rule 4. I think that our desolation, our sense of desolation, and what else was it he was saying about, the loss of hope? You feel like you're far from God. It is, you're just absolutely separate from God, that we have no faith, we lack confidence that our prayers are going to do any good. We just feel like, and I actually went over this with my spiritual director not too long ago, a couple of years ago. I felt like I was tepid, and I was just like weak, and I wasn't doing enough. And he cut my exercises in half and said, "Chill out, relax." And this is what a good spiritual director does. He draws you back and says, you need to just tone it down a little bit and stop relying on feelings. And this is what I was talking about priests and other exorcists. Feelings lie all the time. And so in order to realize and discern whether this is a feeling of just desolation, maybe you lost your job and you're sad and you're depressed and you don't know how to get out of the funk, we have to identify that, because as Ignatius points out in this chapter, if we do not handle and we do not grab the bull by the horns and address the issue, that is going to leave us wide open for spiritual desolation. So the physical and emotional and psychological, when we haven't slept and we haven't eaten and we're not taking care of ourselves, maybe we're not going to the doctor, we're not getting our teeth taken care of, we're not taking care of those things, and we're ignoring those important things that we need to. We've got physical and we've got emotional sadness and heaviness. What is our prayer life going to reflect? What is it going to reflect in the way we feel about ourselves? Those feelings are going to lie. They're going to tell us God doesn't love you. He's not going to answer your prayers. You're not even doing your prayers right. We're going to hear all those little lies that tell us how rotten we are, how stupid we are, how we don't take care of ourselves. All of those lies are going to lead to more feelings. And it's a snowball. It is a snowball effect. And pretty soon, you're in the midst of it. You're believing these lies. And not only does your prayer life suffer, I pray that your guardian angel does a swift kick and pulls you right back in, because it is so easy just to stop everything and say, I can't do it. It's too tough. It's too difficult. I don't want to. I'm not getting anywhere. So I really want you, as I read this chapter, to think about the last time you really got sad and you really felt like there's no reason to pray. There's no reason to have faith. There's no reason to get my kid baptized. I can't tell you how many cases I've had recently, the Office of Exorcism, and in Swords of St. Michael, where they say, well, gosh, I want to help my son or my grandchild or this or that. I want to do this. Are you baptized? Are you spending your time, even if it's just once a week on Sunday? Are you spending time trying to learn about God, trying to learn about what his son was and who he is to you? Are you taking the time to teach anything. Saints, faith practices, Bible. Pull out your Bible. What are you actively, physically doing? It doesn't have to be every day, every minute of the day. You don't have to overload yourself. You just have to take those little baby steps. We cannot get free from the lies and the bondage in our mind until we physically make a decision. I will not stay here. Simple as that. And we look at these things, we tell ourselves, and we're going to write these things down, and we're going to say what? We're going to reject it, we're going to rebuke it, and we're going to bind it like any other spirit. We're just going to make the sign of the cross, and we're going to, whatever that thought is. If that thought says you're lazy and you don't do anything, you say, okay, I'm taking that spirit, that lie of laziness, I'm going to send it right to the foot of the cross where it belongs, for the dispensation of Jesus Christ, and I'm going to ask Jesus by his precious blood to cover me and bind it to the foot of the cross, and send his Holy Spirit to cover and clear and enter into me and fill any hole or void due to that binding. And if you need me to print it down below, post it down below, and I promise you I will type it in. But that's an easy binding prayer. Just bind whatever's bothering you to the foot of the cross and ask the Holy Spirit to fill any holes or gaps, and super easy. It's gone 2 or 3 times. It does take practice. A lot of people tell me, well, I've been doing it. How often did you do it? Well, I did it once, just once. Well, I did it 3 times, just 3 times. When I first started doing that simple prayer, and I'm talking years ago, I had something very physically bothering me. And I'm not going to share exactly what it was, but I will tell you, it took me probably, I don't know, maybe a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes of doing that prayer over and over and over again until I got relief. And this is how you know it's a spirit. If it is a physical ailment, simply binding it to the foot of the cross is not going to give you instant relief. You're still going to have that physical ailment. That means you're going to need to see a doctor. You're going to need to take care of yourself in some way. You're going to need to get sleep. If that physical ailment is gone, you know for a fact it's spiritual. So do not forget this. It's too powerful to bind that enemy. What you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Never forget that. Christ gave us that. Your faith is all powerful, and it'll move mountains. Let's get on with these things that I noted for our journal this week, okay? So, pull your journals out. If you're new here, what we do once a week is we sit down and we think about what we heard, what we are trying to incorporate, how we're trying to grow in little bitty steps, and what we're trying to do. So, in this week's, there's so much to take in, and there's so much to think about here. So I want you, for your contemplation, your consideration, whether, you're going to spend time in the garden, whether you're going, after church, you're going to sit in the exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, whatever time that you have to dedicate and say, God, I need to sit down, and we need some quiet time so that I can figure out how these lies and feelings get me away from you. So for the first one, spiritual desolation. All right. We will have seasons. If it's not now, it's not next month. It might be in 5 years when you lose a child, when you lose a husband, when a spouse, when something hits. Your spiritual desolation may not be far behind, so we must recognize and we must rebuke these lies. So in this spiritual desolation, we have to understand it's a drip erosion. In other words, it doesn't just happen overnight. It's going to be little tiny drops of, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. It will be a buildup of reminders of what you are not. So in understanding that, we have to learn and check out, where did we experience this? How did it come about? Did it start maybe by losing a job? Did it start by losing somebody we loved? So how did it affect our faith practice? Did we maybe stop going to church? I know a lot of people that death or loss or suicide will just pull them right into a black hole, and they may stop going to church. They may stop their prayer practices. They may stop doing novenas. They may stop caring for themselves and not eat very well. Grief does very, very, very tricky things to the mind. And when we need help, we need to ask for it. So in this regard, I'd like us to take a look at the experiences that we've had in the past. And I'd like to make some notes. I want us to make some notes that we could be prepared for battle next time. Because this is a self-exorcism. We cannot begin to discern spirits until we begin with ourself and find out what those spirits are attempting to do with us. Number 2, we have to identify the thoughts and the ideas that come into our minds when we become desolate. We need to identify these in a journal, because when we put them in writing, they lose power. If we remember them, we might get taken back to that feeling, and we don't want to get taken back to feelings. We're in charge of those feelings. We can choose to feel them or not to feel them. And that goes with the bad spirit, as St. Ignatius calls them. So let's write these down in the journal, because we need to rebuke and bind these away from ourselves. Don't entertain these thoughts, okay? That's the point. So I think that about covers it. I am so sorry this was so long. But however, there was so much to cover in this dark night of the soul scenario, and Ignatius is really going deep. And this is just the beginning of his spiritual exercises. This is to help you identify some of the lowest levels of spiritual warfare and self-exorcism. So thank you for coming. Once again, my name is Sister Farah Rose Perry. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. I'm hoping if you'd like to support us, there's links below, Patreon, there's merch down there. There's also prayersbythebead.com if you need a prayer bead set to pray with. And I'm hoping I get to see you next week. Comments down below. And thank you so much. And God bless you. Never forget, Sword of St. Michael is here to help you win the fight and hopefully win it right. God bless. Until next week. Goodbye.